Have you ever stopped and wondered why you keep making the same mistakes, even after promising yourself you would change? What if I told you that almost everything you call a decision isn't really a decision at all? Scientists estimate that up to 95% of your daily behaviors are driven by unconscious patterns that were built long before you became aware of them. Stay until the end, because once you understand where the autopilot comes from, you'll never see yourself the same way again. Every morning begins with the comforting illusion of choice. The alarm rings, a hand reaches for the phone before the eyes are fully open. Notifications appear, emails, news, social media, coffee, the same route to work, the same conversations, the same emotional reactions. Another day begins exactly like the last one. Most people never question it. They simply assume they are living intentionally. But are they? Imagine watching your own life from above. Not for 5 minutes, but for an entire month. How many conversations would sound almost identical? How many emotional reactions would repeat themselves with incredible precision? How many decisions would actually be predictable? The answer is unsettling. Far more than most people are willing to admit. The human brain is obsessed with efficiency. Every repeated action gradually becomes easier because the brain transfers control from conscious processing into automatic neural circuits. What begins as a deliberate choice slowly transforms into a habit, then into a routine. Finally, into something so automatic that it feels like part of your identity. This process keeps you alive. Without it, every simple action would demand enormous mental energy. Walking, driving, brushing your teeth, typing on a keyboard, recognizing faces, none of these would feel effortless. Autopilot is not the enemy. It is one of the greatest evolutionary advantages humanity possesses. The real danger begins when this same mechanism starts controlling your emotions, your beliefs, your relationships, and even your dreams. Most people believe they think before they act. Psychology suggests the opposite happens far more often. The action comes first. The explanation comes afterward. Your brain quietly creates a story that makes the behavior feel logical, even when the real cause remains hidden beneath years of conditioning. That is why changing habits feels so frustrating. People attack the visible behavior while completely ignoring the invisible program running underneath it. Someone promises to stop procrastinating. Another swears they will finally become confident. Someone else decides this will be the year they stop choosing toxic relationships. Days pass, sometimes weeks. Then, almost without noticing, everything quietly returns to exactly where it started. Not because they lacked intelligence, not because they lacked motivation, but because the autopilot never received new instructions. Think about childhood for a moment. Before a child develops critical thinking, the brain absorbs information almost like a sponge. Family dynamics, emotional responses, fear, love, conflict, money, success, failure, safety. None of these are analyzed. They are simply accepted. Every repeated experience slowly writes another invisible line of code inside the developing mind. Years later, adulthood arrives. The child disappears. The programming remains. Someone who constantly heard that failure was dangerous may become an adult terrified of taking opportunities. Someone raised around emotional unpredictability may unknowingly seek relationships that recreate the same chaos. Someone who learned that love must always be earned may spend an entire lifetime exhausting themselves trying to deserve acceptance. None of these patterns feel programmed. They feel natural. That is precisely what makes them so powerful, because invisible rules are almost impossible to question, until something forces you to see them. And that moment changes everything. The most convincing illusion the mind ever creates is the belief that your personality is fixed. People introduce themselves with certainty. I'm just an anxious person. I've never been disciplined. I always overthink. I'm terrible with money. I'm unlucky in relationships. These statements sound harmless, but every one of them quietly reinforces the same invisible program. The brain listens to the words you repeatedly attach to yourself. Over time, those descriptions stop feeling like opinions. They become instructions. Identity begins where repetition ends. Every time a behavior is repeated, the brain strengthens the neural pathway responsible for it. Like walking through a forest, the first trip is difficult. The second is easier. After hundreds of walks, a clear trail appears. Thoughts work the same way. The more often a belief is activated, the less energy the brain needs to access it. Eventually, it becomes the default route. This is why people often return to old behaviors after periods of progress. The old pathway never disappeared. It simply waited. Stress, fatigue, loneliness, fear. Any of these can pull the brain back toward familiar territory. Not because the familiar is better, because the familiar feels safe. The unconscious mind has one primary objective: not happiness, not success, not fulfillment, safety. If a painful environment became familiar during childhood, the brain may continue recreating emotional situations that resemble it, not because it enjoys suffering, but because it recognizes the pattern. To the unconscious, predictable pain often feels less threatening than unfamiliar peace. This explains one of the greatest paradoxes of human behavior. People don't always resist change because they're lazy. They resist change because change feels dangerous to a nervous system trained to survive uncertainty. Imagine someone who grew up constantly criticized. As an adult, every compliment feels suspicious. Every opportunity feels undeserved. Every achievement is quickly minimized. From the outside, it looks like low self-esteem. From the inside, the unconscious is protecting an old identity. If I become someone different, what happens to everything I've believed about myself? That question is rarely spoken, but the brain asks it constantly. Modern neuroscience has revealed something extraordinary. The brain remains adaptable throughout life. This ability is known as neuroplasticity. Neural pathways are not permanent structures carved into stone. They are living networks that strengthen through repetition and weaken through neglect. That changes everything, because it means your past may explain your programming, but it does not have to dictate your future. Still, there is one obstacle that keeps millions trapped: awareness. You cannot rewrite a program you cannot see. Most unconscious behaviors happen so quickly that consciousness arrives only after the reaction has already occurred. The anger, the fear, the avoidance, the self-doubt, the people-pleasing, the procrastination. Each one feels immediate, automatic, almost inevitable. But there is a tiny space, so small that most people never notice it. A fraction of a second between the trigger and the response. That microscopic pause is where freedom begins. Not because it instantly changes your life, but because it interrupts the autopilot for the very first time. And once a person learns to observe their own programming instead of automatically obeying it, the unconscious slowly loses its absolute control. The question is no longer whether you have unconscious patterns. Everyone does. The real question is this: if your mind has been quietly writing your story for decades, who is holding the pen now? The moment you recognize the autopilot, something remarkable happens. For the first time, you stop confusing your programming with your identity. That distinction changes everything. Most people spend years trying to change their lives by attacking behaviors. They force themselves to wake up earlier. They buy planners, they read motivational books, they watch inspirational videos. For a while, it works until it doesn't. Because behavior is the surface. Programming is the foundation. Imagine trying to repaint a house whose foundation is slowly collapsing beneath it. The fresh paint may look beautiful for a few weeks, but eventually the cracks return. Not because the paint failed, because the real problem was never addressed. The same happens inside the mind. If someone believes, deep below consciousness, that they are not worthy of success, every achievement creates internal conflict. If someone unconsciously associates love with sacrifice, healthy relationships may feel strangely empty. If someone learned that making mistakes leads to rejection, perfectionism becomes more than a habit. It becomes survival. This is why awareness alone is not enough. Seeing the program is the beginning. Rewriting it requires repetition. The brain learns through experience, not information. You can understand every psychological theory ever written. You can memorize every neuroscience paper. You can explain exactly how habits are formed, and still remain trapped. Knowledge informs the conscious mind. Repetition transforms the unconscious one. Think about learning to drive. At first, every movement demands attention. Hands on the wheel, mirrors, pedals, traffic signs, every action feels deliberate. Months later, you arrive home with almost no memory of the drive. The brain automated the process. That same mechanism can work in your favor. Every intentional thought repeated consistently begins carving a new neural pathway, not overnight, not in a week, but gradually. The unconscious is patient. It doesn't care about dramatic moments. It responds to consistent ones. This is why small daily actions often outperform massive bursts of motivation. Reading 10 pages every day changes the brain more than reading an entire book once and never opening another. 5 minutes of meditation repeated for months reshape attention more effectively than one perfect hour performed occasionally. One honest conversation every week transforms relationships more than a single emotional breakthrough. The unconscious loves repetition because repetition signals importance. The brain quietly concludes, if this experience keeps happening, it must matter. Then it begins adjusting itself. This is where many people become discouraged. They expect transformation to feel dramatic. Instead, it feels almost invisible. One day, they notice they paused before reacting in anger. A week later, they realize they didn't immediately criticize themselves after making a mistake. Months later, they recognize that situations which once triggered overwhelming anxiety now feel manageable. The change didn't happen in a single moment. It happened thousands of moments earlier. Every pause, every conscious choice, every interrupted pattern, each one became another vote for a new identity. The old pathways still exist. They may always exist, but pathways that are no longer used slowly weaken. Like an abandoned trail in a forest, nature begins reclaiming it. Grass grows, branches spread. The path becomes harder to follow. Meanwhile, the new trail becomes clearer with every step. This is why personal transformation is less about becoming someone new, and more about practicing someone different until that version becomes familiar. The unconscious does not ask whether something is true. It asks whether something is repeated. And that realization leads to one of the most profound questions anyone can face. If your brain has been rewriting itself every single day, whether you noticed it or not, what kind of person are you training yourself to become tomorrow? At this point, another question naturally emerges. If so much of life runs automatically, do we truly have free will? For centuries, philosophers debated this question. Today, psychology and neuroscience offer a more nuanced answer. The unconscious mind may generate the first impulse, but consciousness has the power to shape what happens next. Think of your mind as a river. The current represents years of conditioning. It is powerful, predictable, relentless. Trying to stop the river with pure willpower is exhausting. That is why so many people fail after relying only on motivation. Motivation is temporary, environment is persistent, the people around you, the music you listen to, the content you consume, the room where you work, the conversations you have, the habits attached to specific places. Every one of these becomes part of the programming. Most people underestimate how much their surroundings influence their identity, yet the brain is constantly absorbing patterns from the environment. Not because it is weak, because it evolved to learn from repetition. If every evening ends with endless scrolling on a phone, the brain eventually associates nighttime with passive stimulation. If every stressful moment is followed by unhealthy food, the brain links emotional discomfort with eating. If every challenge is met with self-criticism, the mind begins expecting failure before action even begins. The environment quietly becomes the architect of behavior. This is why changing your surroundings is often more powerful than trying to change yourself directly. Remove the trigger. The behavior becomes less automatic. Add a positive cue. A new routine becomes easier to build. The goal is not to become stronger than temptation. The goal is to encounter temptation less often. This principle explains why successful change rarely begins inside the mind alone. It begins outside of it. A cleaner workspace, a different morning routine, healthier friendships, books placed within reach. The phone left in another room before bed. Small adjustments, massive consequences. Every environmental change sends. the unconscious a new message. This is who we are becoming. Over time, identity begins adapting to the evidence. Not the intentions, the evidence. The brain believes what it repeatedly experiences, not what it occasionally promises. That is why action changes belief far more effectively than belief changes action. Each small promise you keep to yourself becomes proof. Proof creates confidence. Confidence creates consistency. Consistency reshapes identity. Identity sustains behavior. The key cycle finally begins working in your favor. But perhaps the most surprising discovery is this. Your unconscious is not your enemy. It never was. It has been trying to protect you since childhood using the only strategies it knew. Some of those strategies are now outdated. Some are limiting. Some are even painful. But they were built for survival, not happiness. The moment you understand that, self-hatred begins losing its grip. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you begin asking, "What experience taught my brain to believe this was necessary?" That single shift replaces judgment with curiosity. Curiosity opens the door to awareness. Awareness creates choice. Choice creates freedom. And freedom is not the absence of programming. It is the ability to consciously rewrite it. Suddenly, the autopilot is no longer a prison. It becomes a tool, one that can either repeat yesterday forever or quietly build a completely different future. The only question left is whether you're willing to take the controls. Imagine waking up tomorrow, the alarm rings, your hand reaches for the phone. Then it stops. Not because someone forced you, not because you suddenly became a different person, but because, for the first time, you noticed the impulse before obeying it. It seems insignificant. It isn't. That tiny pause is where a new life begins. Most transformations are invisible at first. No applause, no dramatic breakthrough, no moment where the world suddenly feels different. Instead, change arrives quietly. You respond with patience where you once reacted with anger. You take a walk instead of escaping into distraction. You tell the truth instead of saying what people want to hear. You choose rest instead of guilt. Each decision feels almost too small to matter. Yet the unconscious is paying attention. Every conscious action sends the same message. The program is changing. Day after day, the brain updates its expectations, not through promises, through evidence. Weeks pass, then months. One afternoon, someone who has known you for years says something unexpected. You've changed. You smile. Because the truth is, the change didn't happen that day. It happened in hundreds of moments no one else ever saw. The mornings when you resisted the old routine, the conversations where you chose honesty over approval, the evenings when you protected your peace instead of feeding your anxiety, the countless times you interrupted the autopilot before it completed its familiar course. Those invisible victories became your new identity. Many people spend their entire lives searching for a secret that doesn't exist. They wait for the perfect book, the perfect mentor, the perfect opportunity, the perfect amount of motivation, but lasting transformation has never depended on perfection. It depends on repetition. The unconscious doesn't demand extraordinary effort, it demands consistent evidence. It quietly asks the same question every day. What are we practicing? Not, what do we hope for? Your future is being built long before it becomes visible. Every repeated thought strengthens a belief. Every repeated action strengthens an identity. Every repeated identity shapes a destiny. That realization can feel intimidating, but it is also deeply liberating. Because if repetition created the patterns that hold you back, repetition can also create the patterns that set you free. Your past may explain your autopilot. It does not have to remain your destination. The mind is not a prison built from stone. It is a living system, always adapting, always learning, always listening. The question has never been whether your brain is changing. It changes every single day. The real question is whether you are changing it on purpose. Perhaps the most powerful moment in personal growth is not when you finally become confident, or disciplined, or successful. It is the moment you stop believing that your first impulse defines who you are, because thoughts appear, emotions rise, old patterns return, but none of them are your identity. They are simply echoes. Echoes of experiences, echoes of repetition, echoes of a version of you that once needed those patterns to survive. Today, you have something that version of yourself didn't have: awareness. And awareness is where freedom begins. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "This is just who I am," pause. Ask yourself one simple question: is this truly me, or is this just my autopilot speaking? The answer to that question may become the beginning of an entirely new life.